a generation of my time. There is nothing we can do to stop this plague from breaking through. Don't go around and waste my time. A generation of my kind. There is nothing we can do to stop this plague from breaking through.
There we go. Hi, everybody. I had some trouble there getting myself on screen, but I'm here now. Hopefully you can all hear me. Everything looks like it is working okay. I can take my earphones off now. We don't have any more music playing. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. It's so exciting that there's so many of you guys who have managed to make it to this live session. So that's really, really fun. Thank you so much for being here. I see we have people from all over the place. I figured there'd be a large contingent of Europeans just based on the timing of what we're doing here, but I see people from all over the place, so welcome everybody. Yeah, I've just been sort of looking through where everybody's coming from, so it's pretty cool that everybody is from all over the place. Daniel, you're nice and close to me. You're Montreal. I'm just off the island myself. And everybody else. So yeah, let me just, I have one thing I just need to do because I couldn't do it ahead. It won't take me long. I'm gonna click start on that, and hopefully if if you watch any of the bonus sessions or if you were a founding member, I had some issues with switching scenes where we'd be cutting off part of the screen. So I've come up with an automatic scene switcher in OBS, so we should avoid all of that. If I switch between scenes, it should automatically update, which I just realized means I need to move the chat onto this screen, because if not, it'd be problematic. I usually like having the chat close to the camera so I can look back and forth, but here we are. And yeah, I really hope that all of you have been enjoying the first module of the course. I'm digging into it. This week, or that, let's go and see if this automatic scene switcher is even working. Uh-oh, we're supposed to be here, but it did work. Awesome. So yeah, we're doing a bit of a recap of what we learned in module 1 in this one. So I'm going to sort of go over the big ideas that were present in it and talk a little bit about how it's going to lead us up to module 2 and some of, it's my main takeaways from module 1. We're going to do some code just to revisit some of those ideas and have some fun with that. I'm using a design today that you don't have, but I'll make sure to include it somewhere that you guys can get it. A few little bit of housekeeping. Let me just I just remembered one more thing. Uh-oh, what happened? Oh, close that. There we go. Okay. Yeah, a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. One thing, I think there was some issues with emails. I'm pretty sure I've sorted that out. So I do apologize if you didn't get any communication from me and then all of a sudden it was like, there's a live session today. So sorry about that if that was the case. I'm pretty sure I figured out what the problem there was and it's been solved. If you're here, I'm assuming you got the email from me, or one of them anyway. But if not, if you found out through someone else or through the Discord or something like that, make sure you get in touch with me just to let me know you're not getting emails from me. But I think everything should be sorted on that end. There was something else I wanted to talk about, but I didn't take notes, so that wasn't very smart. Let's just see if there's anything going on in the chat. Just everybody's still saying hello and welcome and all of that so far, so great. So one thing, I do like having these live sessions because I do like them being interactive. So make sure if you have a question that you ask it along the way. One thing I will ask is you don't spam your question just to make sure I see it. In general, once I start teaching stuff, the chat goes pretty quiet. So if you have a question, throw it out there. But if I miss it along the way, just write it again. I'm going to try and focus and do like what I want to talk about, and then I'll sort of break away at certain times to the chat. So if I'm ignoring you a little bit, I will get to it at one point and try and make sure that I don't miss any of the questions that do come up. But the more questions you guys ask, the better overall. It's going to make a better product for everybody involved, because that does mean, if you're thinking something and wondering something, I guarantee you there's other people that are wondering the same thing. So don't hold it in. Make sure you ask. Even there's no such thing as a silly or stupid question. So make sure you ask your questions along the way. Okay, the other thing I do realize, I'm going to send out an email regarding, for anybody who's in the gold tier, I know that there was some confusion about the course being locked or unlocked with the start dates. So I will be sending out an email on Monday, or over the weekend probably, that's just going to sort of explain the dashboard a little bit, because there was some confusion there from multiple people, quite a few. So that was a problem on my, well, it's the way it got organized was alphabetically and not by order. So anyway, we'll see there. Sergio is asking if this is going to spoil anything. Even if you haven't started the first module, I don't think this is going to spoil anything. It could be seen, if you haven't done it or if you haven't finished it yet, see it as a preview of what's to come. Because I won't focus too heavily on things. It's more about the ideas and putting them into practice quickly. And then the material of the course is the longer version of it. So yeah, even if you haven't had a chance to look at any of the material yet, I don't think that it's going to spoil anything. I think it could technically work in any order, but I am going to treat it like a recap. But yeah, you'll be fine even if you haven't finished it all yet. The other thing that's really important here is even if I was originally calling each one of them weeks, and as you can see very big on the screen right now, it is a module. They were formulated as modules. Each one has a specific topic, and each one builds on top of the next one. But really, really important, don't feel like you have to finish each one each week. There's a little bit less content next week, though I think it's really setting the stage up. So it's not as long in terms of content itself, but it might be longer for you to complete because the project we're working on is much bigger. So your side, you'll have more work to be doing, but there's a little bit less from me talking, not substantially, but there's a little bit less. But yeah, if you don't get through it all, that's fine. Make sure you're taking this at your own pace and going on at your own pace and not trying to rush to keep up. Because I think that's the last thing you want to do if you're trying to learn something is to rush through it. Dave's saying he hasn't even seen the first module. So it should be in your dashboard. Maybe I'll go take a look after. I might take a look at the course dashboard after just to show you what it looks like, to make sure we can all find what we're looking for. How long this course will be, and would you be able to break down what topics we'll be learning down the line? It was all in the emails or on the original sales page. Actually, if you go to cssdemystified.com right now, you can see what each week is covering in terms of the subject matter. Yeah, if you haven't started any of the material yet, really don't worry. See, this is a preview instead of a recap of everything. So if there's a few things when I'm going through it that if I go too fast or you feel like you're not 100% sure what I'm talking about, it's completely fine. You just, it'd be like, oh, these are things that I'll be learning about shortly. So it should be all good on that front. I think that is it from the question. So yeah, again, thank you all for joining me. And I'm assuming I wanted to talk a little bit here before we really jumped in, just to make sure everybody, I'm going to try and slow down too. Just because I know I'm talking maybe a little bit fast at times. People always comment that I talk a little fast. So I'll try and be conscious of that because I know you can't slow down a live stream. For the replays, the replay will be permanently available. So you'll be able to access the replay at any time you want. I'll post the link to it over the weekend at one point or another. And yeah, it's going to be part of like the permanent course material. And another nice thing is I do plan on relaunching this course in the future. So I'll just really quickly, before I get into the recap, when I relaunch the course, there'll be 2 extra modules. So you guys are all getting the 2 extra modules. One of them is going to be about dev tools, and the other one I'm sort of flip-flopping right now, but it's really going to be still focused on demystifying CSS, which means that there'll probably be 2 extra live sessions, 1 or 2, but every time I run the course, you'll have access to the lives if you want to jump in and partake again. All the lessons are always available, all updates, you'll have all of them, and any future lives I do with new, as people join the course next time, you'll be able to jump in on board on those. I've set it for 2 hours. That's the longest I can be here for. I don't even know if we're going to go 2 hours. I always say that, and then I always end up hitting 2 hours. I could go a little bit longer, but we're going to aim for, let's say we're aiming for, I don't have a ton that I want to get through right now. So, I could get through everything probably in an hour, and then it really depends on your questions. And I'm going to be sticking around and answering questions, anything like that. We actually got a few really good questions that came in. That I've included in the slides here, and we got one that just came in. There's a few really good questions that I'm looking forward to diving in from you guys, so I'm looking forward to that too. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cough. Pretty sure it's only just a little mucousy throat, nothing to be worried about. It is cold season, so. So module 1 recap. In week 1, we talked about a lot of things, but the main points of it were, why is CSS so weird? We had that at the very beginning. and also at the same time talking about the relationships and how it's all about relationships. And then that sort of went into the idea of the inheritance and the cascade, and that was really the focus of everything. And a lot of it was embracing the cascade and taking advantage of how inheritance works, which is about relationships, but also how the cascade works and exploring the cascade in a deeper level a little bit than what I usually see people diving into it with. I see a few good questions coming up, but I'm going to go through a few of these and then I'll go back into the chat in a second. So yeah, that was sort of the three big talking points through the first module of the course. And the main thing that I want you to take away from module 1, if you're going to walk away with anything whatsoever from it, is that there's a reason that CSS is different from other languages. And this is something I touched on really early on in the module. And it's probably one of the reasons people don't like CSS is because it's different. And they think it's different because they think it's broken because it's different, but there's a reason that it's different. And the main reason for that is when we're writing our CSS, we're working with incomplete information where we don't have the entire picture. And for those of you who haven't gone through the course, you get a lot more details on this. I talk quite a bit about it. But we don't know about the viewport size. We don't know if the user is zoomed in. We don't know what their input device is. We don't know a lot of different things about the situation. Whereas if you're writing HTML, you're just putting the content there. If you're writing JavaScript, you're saying, if this happens, do this. And the person clicks on this, do this. You're being very precise, and you do want to, we're working within limited scope. Whereas the CSS, we're working with a lot of incomplete information, and that makes it a little bit harder. So instead of fighting it and trying to battle with CSS to make it like these other languages that people are more comfortable with, we need to take CSS for what it is. And the reason we need to do that is CSS does most of these things in a way to help us cope with the unknowns. All those things that we don't know about, CSS is trying its best to be set up so we can work around them. And in the course, I'm talking specific, I bring up very specific points, but even if you go into more advanced things like grid and flexbox, the whole idea of how those work and the way they can adjust and the way they're flexible, and flexbox is meant to be flexible, it just illustrates that even as CSS gets more complex, a lot of those complexities is to deal with these unknowns. And that's why we're getting a lot of these newer features that are coming out. It's to help us come up with new tools to be able to deal with all these unknown situations. And actually, I'm going to stop there for a second and just jump over to the chat. So yeah, you can see it. First of all, I'm getting a little bit passionate about this, and it is because I do find CSS gets a lot of hatred from people who don't really understand that it's different for a reason, and that it's created in a way that is there to help us with what we have. And I did put most in brackets there because there are a few things it does weird. We're going to see those especially in module 2. Module 2 gets, we're doing formatting context and stacking context. And especially in the stacking context and containing block section, there's a few things in there that happen. They happen for a reason, but they're not. They're kind of annoying. So those are things we just have to cope with. And sometimes there's weird behaviors that we just have to cope with. But for the most part, CSS is trying to help us. And one other thing that happens is because people are so used to other programming languages where global scope is a bad thing, in CSS it's not. In CSS, it's actually a really good thing that we have a global scope. And we can create scope if we need to. So we have a global scope. We can access everything that we want. But if we need to go into another situation, we can. If we need to create a local scope, we just have to take advantage of how CSS works to be able to do that, even though very often it's in a way that people tell us not to work. And I'm going to talk more about that in the lessons, but we're going to look at an example of what I mean really soon. There's also, as I said, modern CSS offers us a lot of great solutions to some of the problems that come up as well. Things like Flexbox and Grid are amazing. We now have like clamp and min and max functions, and there's more on the way. There's been a lot of talk on Twitter actually yesterday about container queries. and where that's going. It looks like they're going to implement some sort of container query soon, which is really exciting. Try to think and work in the way that CSS works. And so what I mean by this slide is that instead of thinking about how we need it to work, we need to understand how CSS works to be able to take advantage of it and work the way it's meant to work instead of fighting against CSS as much as possible. And the CSS, as I said just a few slides ago, it has a global scope, and that people seem to not like the global scope because we're used to other programming languages where global scope is a bad thing and you need to avoid it at all costs. But because CSS is global, it is a good idea to start there. So I saw a question about BEM and naming conventions and stuff, so I'm going to get there in a second, but let's jump on over to VS Code and Firefox. So what I mean when I say that it's a good idea to start with the global scope is a lot of what I like to do with CSS is we want to make things as easy as possible. So whenever you start, instead of starting, when people struggle with CSS, a lot of the time what they're doing is they're focused on one thing at a time and they sort of work their way down. I know a lot of people, when they start writing HTML and CSS, they'll write the HTML for this, and then they'll write the CSS for this. Then they'll write the HTML for this, and then they'll write the CSS for this. And then this one here, and then they'll move. Maybe not so much in this layout because it is so repetitive, but I see this all the time where people focus on one thing at a time. One thing we really need to do, and CSS is a design language, so we have to look at the design, and we have to look at it starting at a global perspective. And especially in Module 2, I talk a lot about quick wins. And so if you start at the global scope, that's where you can set up all of your quick wins really, really easily and get a lot of things done super quickly. And then you start narrowing down where you need to narrow down. Part of this will come up a bit in with the naming convention. So Michael mentioned, well, he said, thank you for introducing the BEM naming convention. Is this convention standard for working as professional developers? Should we all start using it? I've used it for years and I've actually started moving away from it, but it is very common. I think the last time I looked, it was out of all of the different ones, it is the most popular one. At the end of module, or if it's not right at I think it's right at the end of the module, I do link to several other naming conventions that are really popular. So you could always check that out because some naming conventions will speak to you more than others. There was, Gregory mentioned Cube CSS as well. And BEM, I think my issue with BEM is it doesn't embrace CSS as much as we could, whereas things like Cube do. And Cube actually says, and Cube's by Andy Bell. I'm not going to dive specifically into it in this course because I haven't really jumped fully in, but I will be having material over on YouTube on it shortly after this course is done as I dive more into it. But what I love about Cube is, and what Andy's doing with it is the first step is the global and then just embracing CSS for what it is, and then breaking it down in a way that is very much how I'm teaching this course, to be honest, about embracing CSS for what it is, for allowing nesting, and seeing it not necessarily as a bad thing, and to be starting at the big picture, using things like utility classes, and then getting more specific when we need to get more specific. And I'm going to show a lot of examples of that by building out this design here. Patrick is mentioning, I can see a lot of problems are because I named my classes wrong and I use them in my code totally chaotic. Hopefully this course will be able to help you with that in seeing how I name things. I do think one reason people have trouble with BEM, I think, is the lack of utility classes. And so I am going to use one here, even though we're not really going to repeat it too often. But I do think that utility classes are, we want to create classes we can reuse as much as possible and in as many places as possible. Or it doesn't even have to be classes, it's just selectors. Like you want to try and go with selectors where you can reuse them as much as possible. So we all know the first thing we should do is box sizing border box. So I'm going to throw that right here at the top. You could also have it, I don't think I'm going to put any pseudo elements in here today, but we could have our before and our after as well. We shouldn't see any changes when you first put that, but it's a nice starting place. In module 2, we're going to work on building out a bigger reset, and in module 3, we're going to add even more stuff into a reset. But this is always the very first thing I have at the top of every single file I ever work on. Actually, I didn't include it in the slides, and I didn't plan for this, but I'll talk about it a little bit, because I always get asked, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to say body next, and put my margin to 0. And I get asked a lot if we should just do a margin 0 and padding 0 here. And actually in module 2, we're going to be resetting a lot of margins. So you might go, well, this makes my life easier. But I do find it's a little bit heavy-handed, because there are things I want margin and padding on, even if it's from the user agent styles. So personally, I do think it's a little bit too much. If you want to work that way, there's nothing that prevent you from working that way, though. Adam's asking why you could just do this and it would work just as well, I think. Yeah, you could just do it like that. I've just gotten so far into the habit of having the wildcard selector on there that I just always have been putting it. But if you do that, it's going to select all your before and after. It's sort of like if you did a hover just like this. You don't see it often. But I could say background is red. That's going to select everything I hover on top of. So, I mean, it's even changing the body right now, so everything changes. But if you do a pseudo element or a pseudo selector without a class before it, it just applies it everywhere. So yeah, we can do that. But yeah, by having this here, we want to reset everything. Just because it's kind of frustrating that the wildcard selector by itself won't actually select your box sizing, your box sizing. It won't select your pseudo elements. So you do have, if you want your pseudo elements to have the box sizing border box, you do have to put them all. You have to create a selector that has all of them right there. And again. Not again, but we'll keep going with this. And it's a problem I do. I always say again when I want to get back into something that I'm working on. And I say it sometimes when it doesn't really work because it's not something I've said before. Let's just move my design over so we can actually see a little bit at the same time. There we go. In this case, I don't really think I need them to be there. I'm not going to use pseudo elements, but it's just, I like how I'm not actually writing that most of the time. I'm bringing it from a reset. So if I don't know if I'm actually going to use them or not, it's better that it's just there. And then, so going back to our design, we want to do quick wins and we want to take advantage of inheritance and we want to take advantage of how CSS works. And so on my body, we can also put my font family. And in this case, the design, it's Poppins. And I did mention I'm going to provide the files I have here. So I'm probably going to give you the file with a blank CSS, or I'll give it to you with the finished one, but just so you know, the HTML I'll give you finished, and it will include the fonts that are linked and all of that. All the project files I give you, even if the HTML isn't finished, it's always going to include the links to Google Fonts or silly things like that, just because we don't want to spend time having to set that up. So right away, in this case, all my fonts are using Poppins, so it makes it's an easy choice. I don't even have to think about it. If you're not setting things up with Poppins, if you have a different font for your heading and a different font for your body text, I would suggest doing, and I'm saying body text, your paragraphs. If your paragraphs are using a different font from your headings, I would put the paragraph text as my font family on the body, and then I would get more specific and do something like that, and then font family, I don't know, whatever, Frank Gilson, and switch the headings. Just because this tends to be a little bit easier. This is going to include things like list items. So if you came in and had a list and you didn't have this on the body, then your list is what's it getting, right? So that's why I try not to set font families on paragraphs specifically, because if you have lists, or you might have things that just aren't in a paragraph, it might just be a link that's floating by itself. It also opens up the whole like button font and font family inherit because I talk about this in the first week, but all the form elements that don't inherit things, we might want to set those in a reset to inherit, just to make our life a bit easier. So if it's on the body, we know we can force those things to be inherited. So that's why in general, the paragraph text is what gets put as my font family on my body. So next up, so I mean, right away, that's obviously some quick wins just by doing that. Actually, I'm going to show you, I'm giving you all the Figma files, and I apologize because I haven't set all the Figma files up to be using the styles. So if you don't know Figma, it's fine. But here I've set up local styles. So it's like a paragraph style type of thing. So if I make a text box and I put some text in there, I can switch here in Figma to switch between those different settings that I have. And you can do the same thing with colors. You can have my primary color. Let's make that font bigger first. So here in Figma, I can switch between my colors really easily. It's all presets. So just, you know, it's like having your style, custom properties, I guess. And there's actually a really good plugin that I got, which is, if I go to my plugins, export styles to CSS variables, which is amazing. So in the future files, I'll try and set these up, but I don't always have them. But you can see I can choose which color system I want it to export to. Colors, text sizes, I can even have it use rem and my body, but it's going to treat the body as at 18. So I'm not going to choose rem units, and I'll just switch them. And if you saved any effects like shadows and stuff within Figma, you get them all. So you can see it just makes a nice little list. So let's come and bring those in. I want my root. And if you don't know about custom properties or you haven't used them, I talk about them a lot during the first module. And we are using a lot of custom properties throughout this course, just so you know. So I can bring those in, and then these I can switch. And actually, I'm going to jump back to the slides for a second. I had one question that was about ems and rems, so I'm going to talk about that as I make changes. And there was a few people asking about when to use ems or when to use rems. And then there was this one about setting a font size on the HTML itself. And just because I talked a bit about that, so I do want to bring that up while I'm talking about font sizing. We'll come to that one after. So, and where's my design? Sorry about my throat, guys. I hope it's not too bad on the. So yeah, when you're setting up your fonts in general, or you basically never want to use pixels for font sizes, and I talk about why you don't want to use pixels in the module. So we do want to convert them over to either rem or em. And I'm going to set them all to be rem. And the question that comes up a lot is it okay to do an HTML font size 62.5%? And this is a really, really common thing to do. A lot of people like doing this. I don't do it, and I've been seeing less of it. So I honestly don't know how common it is, but it is definitely something that a lot of people do. And one thing I mentioned specifically in the course is not to set a font size on your HTML, but I am really looking at doing it and saying don't set it as 10 pixels. Because if you set it as 10 pixels, it really hurts on the accessibility. For font sizes, if you're using pixels from an accessibility standpoint, it can really cause problems. So we want to use ems and rems. The reason that people like coming in and doing the 62.5% here is because the default font size on the HTML element for all the browsers is 16 pixels. Now users can change that, so the user does have an influence on that, but the default is 16 pixels for all the browsers. So if you do 16 times 62.5, it makes it 10 pixels. And the reason people like doing that as 10 pixels is because then they can come on their body and say that the font size is 1.8 rem, and then you know that 1.8 is going to be 18 pixels. So that's the reason that people like using this little guy here. I'm still looking into it, but everything I've seen, if you are going to change your HTML font size as a percentage, as long as you're bringing the font sizes back up with something like this, so they get back to a readable size, it seems to be perfectly fine. It doesn't seem to cause any issues. The reason I don't do it is just I've gotten so used to not doing it that you know, I don't do it anymore. Or I never really got into it, so I got so used to using a base of 16 that it doesn't really bother me not having it. But what I'll do is I'll leave this commented out just in case some people do want to use it. You know, it doesn't break anything, it doesn't cause any issues from an accessibility standpoint. So if you go that way, there's no problem. But then instead, if I'm not doing that and I want to get to 18, I just have to open up a calculator. And you start to, this is where you start to remember the values. So like 18 divided by 16 is 1.125. And then you remember that 20 is 1.25, or is that 21? Whatever, I might mix those two up. And you remember 36, you know, you get to all like the standard font sizes you tend to see, and you start remembering what they are anyway, and you don't even have to pull up your calculator all the time. But it's how you want to work. So here I can put my font size 1.125 rem. And we're good to go. And I'm going to get a bit more into the discussion of the difference between M and rem a little bit, just for people that are a little bit confused by it. I'm just checking out the chat. Sorry, guys. A really good question there, Jimmy, about the box sizing border box. There is the other way, where here you're putting it to inherit, and then on the HTML, you're setting your box sizing border box. And that would be, I'm just going to put this here because it goes in this order. So everything is becoming a box sizing inherit, and then you're setting your box sizing border box on the HTML. So that means everything's inheriting it from the HTML because everything is a child of the HTML element. And the reason this became a thing is if you're using something, say you're doing a WordPress site and you're bringing in a plugin, and the plugin was created without using this. What it means is you could go in and choose like .plugin, plugin name, and do a box sizing content box. And then everything that's inside of that plugin that has like a specific class name on it goes back to being content box. So it's useful if you're bringing in things that might not have used this reset in the first place, which is why you see this quite often. Or I see it less and less, just because I think so much stuff is automatic. People are automatically using the border box for everything now, that I think it's a lot less of an issue. But yeah, that's why you might see something like that. Let's get back to there. Okay. So quick wins. Again, we're setting up my font sizing. So here, my body, actually, I should be using my variable. So we'll set body is 18. And then my var, I'm going to do font size body. I won't use this here. I'll just put font size. I do like having prefixes on everything. I do talk about how I name my custom properties. So if you haven't been following the course, I do talk about that. As I said, we go pretty heavy into custom properties. I also actually, in the bonus content, there's a full lesson just on custom properties as well. So I'd suggest watching that one. And we're after actually, I just realized I have to make a change in my HTML as well. But that's okay. We're after the quick wins. So the first thing, and I never exported this image, so I might not bring it in the demo. The next thing I would do before worrying about colors or worrying about anything else is just looking at the bigger picture of things and trying to find the things that we can focus on as consistent or the same throughout the entire design. So one of them is our font sizes. So I mean, I could set up the other fonts, and I guess we can do that now. H1 font size is my var font size title. I know I left it as pixels, but we'll just leave it like that for now for brevity's sake. And H2 would be font size, I forget what I called it, heading, yeah. So again, quick wins, those get changed. And there's things like your line height and other things like that that probably need to be adjusted. Our margins probably need to be adjusted, but I don't want to look at, and we can get there depending on how we're doing for time. But the next thing that I sort of want to look at is like, how can we get some quick wins for the rest of this? And this is where I'm saying always start at the global and then work your way down. So we started with my body, and then here we're selecting kind of specific things. We're selecting our typography, and I usually do typography first. I talk about this a lot more in module 3 when we talk about content versus layout, just because the content has an influence on layout. So making sure all of your typography is set first helps you be able to adjust your layouts appropriately. But then if I look in my markup, I have my hero, and actually this should have been a section. And this could be a section. Yeah, I'll leave it as a section. It makes my life easier. But I have my section of my hero there. I have another section here, another section here. So I'm not worried about diving inside of these yet. I don't want to get into them. I want to look at the sections themselves. And is there something I can do? And like, I could give each section a class name, and I'm going to probably have to because the colors are going to change on each one of them. But looking at it again from a quick win perspective, I could come in and select all my sections and give them some padding. So padding, I don't know how much. Let's just do 3 rem top and bottom, 0 left and right, just so I can get the spacing that I need on them, because we can see we have some spacing. It ends up being 80 pixels. I'm not even sure. So if we wanted to, I could do 80 divided by 16, 5. I'm going to put the 5 right there. So again, it doesn't look perfect because we don't have the full layout that's done yet, but we're getting our spacing that's being done with just one selector, and it's adding all the spacing I needed. And in general, a good design is going to have a lot of consistency. So if you have a design, when you have that consistency, it makes it a lot easier to come in with these selectors and make these changes along the way as well. And actually, just back on the typography quickly, like I'm selecting my H1, which is only at one spot, and then my H2, but again, I'm not looking at like my H2 that's inside this section. I'm looking at my H2s in general. And if, I did put section titles on those. So if I needed to, I could even do like a dot section title and have that with my font size and some other styling on it. And to me, that's still a generic or a global selector in the sense that I'm reusing it everywhere throughout my site. I'm not using it in one specific place. So as much as you can, start at the big and work your way down, because that's how CSS is working. So don't do one area and then do another area and then do another. Start big and then work your way down. The next thing I want to do is actually set up my colors. So I'm just going to throw in color in front of each one of those. I need one more. I'm just going to come in with a color neutral. Let's do white, I guess, because it is white. Usually I don't name, usually I use a numbering convention, but we'll just go with this. And I know in this design, like it's my first section, my second section, and my third section, but whenever you have changing background colors or things like that, they're probably things that are going to get reused in different areas. So I do think for stuff like this, it's super useful to have, I call them utility classes. So we can have a BG light can be my background, is my color light, and my color is my var color neutral dark. I want a light, I want an accent, or I should call it primary because that's the color. I called my color primary, and I'll call this one dark. So my background is going to be my primary, and then this will be white. And then I have my BG dark, which will be neutral dark. And then my color is white, so white. And then I can come in on each one of my sections. So now I can say class is BG light. Copy that, paste it here, paste it here. That's it, just hit save, and we should see that it's all updated. So then I can come on the second one, accent, primary, not accent, sorry. And I get my accent color, and now you can see that spacing that we put on really early on is working out because I have all my spacing all set up just with one selector. And then BG dark. And just like that, everything's starting to come together. So we're again, trying to look at the big picture. And the nice thing with doing a class like this is it is so interchangeable and reusable, because I could come up back onto this first one if the design changed and put a BG dark, and it switches right away for me. Or if I had a new section, let's say I needed to change my hero section, I could come on my hero and give that the BG primary. And I could change the color on it instantly without having to do very much work. And the more you can create classes like this that are reusable, instead of hard coding everything into specific places, the easier it's going to be able to create sites that are easier to build. And it's something that I do want to try and focus on a lot throughout this course. With that, I'm going to take a quick look at the chat and see what's going on. Randy, I see you asked, I use VW 100%. Is that bad? It seems to work. I'm not... Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Just because there might... I'm not sure I fully understand the question. So just elaborate a little bit on that, because it might be something... It might be something that's completely fine, but I'm a little bit, there might be a problem that it could cause depending on the situation that you're using it in. So just if you could clarify your question. David Henson, on units, I find it more intuitive to use percentages on larger components, things that are around half or a third of the body, and are M's and Rems a better choice? That's a really good question. So yeah. Well, a quick look at that. One thing I didn't do in any of these, which I should have done, is they need a container or a wrapper to keep them from touching the side of the screen. So I should have put everything here. So in my hero, for example, we could have a container, which would start there, and it would close all the way at the end. And then let's just set this up really fast. This is .container. I do mention it in the course, but I am using Prettier. So if I have really messy HTML and then I hit save, it fixes that for me. .container. And one more time. .container. There we go. So .container is, I'm going to give it some padding of 0 top and bottom, and I'm going to put 2M, it could be 2 rem left and right. But then I'm also going to give it a max width of, say, and this is where like 900 pixels is the easy one to do, because you can sort of visualize. Let's go really small just so we can see it. I'm going to put a box on it. Outline of 2 pixels solid red, just so we can see what it looks like. And a margin of 0 auto to throw it in the middle. So for something like this, I think it makes a lot more sense to have this being set up using a like a set unit, right? Like the maximum size, I don't want it to be a percentage. I want it to hold things. So the max width here is going to be, I could have 600 pixels, or I could figure out what that would be in M or Rem. So here I might say it's something like 50 Rem. It's a little bit bigger, but I think it fits better with the design. So obviously for something like that has like a set size, I think it makes more sense to give it an actual value. When it comes to the elements that are inside, so say you need to split this up into 2 columns, using percentages is perfectly fine, and a lot of the time a lot easier to work than trying to calculate what it should be. We tend to use Flexbox. It used to be we had to use percentages because we were using float-based layouts, and if we're doing a float-based layout, it's a nightmare to begin with. But now with Flexbox, because of how Flexbox works, and it doesn't really keep the size that you assign it, it gets a little bit weird, but by using percentages, you definitely have more control. Because actually, let's go look up here where I had my image that I never brought in. Let's just bring one in to explore that idea a little more. On splash it, 200, 600. I think that's width and height. It might take us, oh, I have to save. It might take a second to load. So here on my hero, I have my container, and then I have these 2 areas here. So I'm just going to make a flex class, so display flex. So if I did .flex is a display of flex to give myself 2 columns. At this point, and I'm just going to do one quick selector here, .flex star outline 2 pixels solid blue. I guess just, or actually I should make them different colors. Okay, so we won't do that. We'll do hero content. Isn't that what I called it? It is. Is outline 2 pixels solid blue. And my .hero image is outline 2 pixels solid red. So we can see the two of them. So because it's using flex, flex is kind of weird with the sizing of things, because if I give each one of these a width of 100%, they're gonna be 50% each, which is a big topic of week 3. So ignore the image. I'll give this a background too, background of red, just so we can visualize it a bit more. So I have like the red box is 50% now, and this one's 50%. So on that sense, even using percentages is a little weird, but if I did do a 60 and a 40, it will be 60 and 40, or if I did like a 70 and 30. So if you're doing it for something like that, I do think it makes a lot of sense to use percentages instead of actual values, because as your layout changes and things are growing and shrinking, I think it makes a lot of sense that it's a percentage of the parent and not like a set value, because the set value, again, because the way Flexbox works could cause problems, or it's going to overcome your problems and smush things automatically. But if you're using grid, then percentages might be easier. Or even if you're using grid, you're probably not setting widths on things anyway. It is a little bit dependent on the situation. It is something that I'll be talking about a bit more in week 3 as well, just because we want to be careful. I'm actually going to advise against this as much as possible. Not completely, because there are situations where you have to do it. But I'd much prefer that the hero itself is defining what's inside of it, rather than each one of these guys defining how big it is. But that's a bit more for later. Adam Lawrence, those BG classes are utility classes. Exactly, yeah. Any class that you could take and reuse anywhere you want. And in general, a utility class, like my container would be a utility class. It's something that I'm taking that I can use once in, it has 3 lines of code, but it's doing one thing that I can reuse over and over and over. And it only does that one thing really well. So I'm only adding the padding. It's setting a width. All it's doing, like the padding I've set on here, there's 0 padding on the top and the bottom, because I only want it setting padding on the left and the right and nowhere else, because I only want it worrying about widths. So everything to do with this is concerned about the width. The margin 0 auto is I'm setting a width and then keeping it in the middle. My BG classes, they're doing 2 things. They're doing the background and the text color. I've seen people who like separating those. You have a BG class that's the background color and then a text class for the font color. Personally, I think that's overkill, because then in your markup you have to do both, and usually designs are very consistent. And if you do need to override it, there's ways of doing that anyway. So I'm not in love with that. I like setting both most of the time. I see Vince asking about Sass. I like Sass a lot. I have a course that's closed on Sass. I'm a big fan of Sass, so I would say that it's worth learning. Personally, I think it is. If you start getting into more of the CSS and JS stuff, a lot of, you're not writing Sass so much because you're writing your CSS and JavaScript, but a lot of the functionality of Sass is baked into that. So there's a lot of good things that can come from it. And then on smaller projects, it can seem like overkill. Even though even on small things, there's parts of Sass I like, but on the bigger the project, the more useful I find it becomes. Jane, shouldn't the pseudo classes go after the HTML? This here, you mean? I always put this as my first thing. Or even this, like this is the order I do it in. It doesn't really matter too much in this case, if that's what you're talking about. If you want, you can ask again if I understood your question wrong. Patrick, sometimes I have problem with utility classes. I have many of them and they start overwriting, usually when I start mobile view. So one thing, another reason I like doing quick wins early on is because if I look at this in a mobile view, I'm pretty much there. So you can see like my mobile is working. Well, here it's broken, but I've started doing other stuff. But when you just set up your typography, your spacing, your colors, your mobile view is often pretty far along. I think if you're using utility classes for positioning things, maybe there's a different way to approach it. Because positioning starts getting things a little bit more interesting. Randy, oh, okay, good. On your question on the viewport, I use viewport width for padding, margins, font sizes, widths, heights, and it makes my sites resize responsively, but I don't hear about using them. It's because viewport units are terrible for accessibility purposes. So say, let's just say on this site, I set my font size, my body here as 3 viewport width. That's way too big. I don't use them very often. Too small. 2? Okay, so that looks close to what I had. The issue that happens with viewport units is if I zoom in, you can see that the font's not changing. This font's changing because that's not a viewport unit, but this one hasn't changed. Or if I zoom back out, it's still the exact same size. And people do zoom out and zoom, they don't zoom out very often, but they often zoom in because they want bigger font sizes. And the other issue with that is it does lead to really small font sizes at small screen sizes. So if I shrink that down, the font can get really small. Now there's ways of overcoming that. You can use a clamp. I love doing that. So you use clamps, you set a minimum maximum size and then the viewport unit in the middle. We'll look at it. Clamp. This is a bit more of, this is like brand new CSS and it's out, not really what I want to talk about, but that's okay. So I could set this as like 1 rem is the smallest, 2 viewport units, say plus 1 rem, and then 3 rem, which is an exaggeration. I wouldn't go that big. But what that's saying is I have 1 rem is the smallest it can get, 3 is the biggest, and then this is my middle ground. And you don't need to wrap it in a calc if you're used to this, just because it's automatic. So you can see it's getting bigger and it's getting smaller, but it has a maximum minimum size. So for something like that, I think it's fine. But if you start using it for padding and everything else, unless you're always using calcs to include a base rem or m unit, just for response, it's for really big screens, I think things might get out of hand big. And for really small screens, things can get really, really small. And then there is the issue of you can't zoom in or out or modify the font sizes at all. So it's really, using viewport units, especially for font sizes, is frowned upon for accessibility purposes. I did see a question about accessibility early on. I sort of bring up parts of it during the course, but it's not my focus just because I'm not an expert, even though I'm trying to do my best with accessibility. Archtube85 is asking why I'm using outlines instead of borders. You could use a border. The big difference between outline and border is outline has no influence on the layout. So if I made this 10, it's 10 wide, but if I made this a border, it might not show up really well here. You can see how like my image actually moved down a little bit. So borders are part of the box model. So if I make a big border, it's getting added to the total size. Or even if you have your box sizing, whatever. But in outline, outlines are better for debugging because they have no influence on the layout. It's sort of like a box shadow. A box shadow you can make huge, it just overlaps other content. Oh, someone, Gregory already answered that. Matthew Berg, do I have an opinion on Tailwind CSS? I think it's nice for prototyping. I get that you can work really quickly. I like utility classes, but I think at one point I like writing my own CSS. But I do think if you're good at CSS and you really understand it, you can use tools like Tailwind maybe more efficiently. But I get annoyed when everything is utility class and you're just going crazy with them everywhere. But you know. John Collins, Sass and Bem work well together. They work amazingly well together. And Mitchell followed that up with, does Cube work well with Sass? Andy is a huge proponent of Sass. So when I had my conversation with him, he did mention to me that he sort of built it with Sass in mind, not so much CSS in mind. But obviously it works really well with CSS as well. Brent, yeah, my wife got me a coffee. She's off work today. Usually the last 2 live streams I've done, my wife has been home, which usually she's not, so it's kind of funny. All right, it's much better than the water I was drinking. Okay, I've gotten off topic, man. I was like, I'm gonna be laser focused on this, and anyway, I hope you guys are enjoying this. And I hope I'm not zigzagging around too much or going off topic too much. For an area like this, I saw Jeff ask about using Flexbox to do something like this. I'm not going to do it now just because it's going to take me a little bit to set up. But what I would do is I would make the parent display flex like I've already done. I don't want to fill. I want to stroke. So I would have this as a display flex. The black box you see there would be a display flex, so it creates 2 columns. And then I would just set to align item center. So this is vertically aligned, and the height of my image is what's defining the height for my parent. And I might have to, in this case, because of the sizes of them, as much as possible, I would try and get the image to define the width, but you might have to set a width in. I'd probably do it very similar to how I did it actually, and just have this align content center. I did the same thing here. Yeah, okay, the blue box is centered, but it's within the parent, so it's centered within that height of the red. Let's just turn all that off. So there you go. You get. I would probably do something like this, and actually I do something really similar in week 2. The hero area in week 2, it's a little bit different, but it's super similar to this. So I won't put these together. I would have that as 2 different classes to do something like this, but you get the idea. I saw a question about using container instead of using and I lost it now. I don't know who said it. Let's see if I can find it. Here we go. Peter, that's actually a really, yeah, I could definitely do a section star and just take all of this and put it on that. One reason that it's nice having the container to do this instead of doing that is just because you won't in this layout, this selector would work really fine. If you're not familiar with this, in week 2 we're going pretty heavy. We have a few different selectors that are similar to this. I use one for flex layouts and I use one for something else. So this is all the direct children of my section. So if we were to go and look in a section, and if I took off my container, it would be setting my H2, my paragraph, and my paragraph would all be getting these settings on it, which would replicate exactly what we have right now. So doing that definitely works. My issue with this is we're not always doing it on sections. So then you end up with this, and then you need it, or maybe you have it like that, and so you have a container and you can do it on all your sections. This could maybe be useful in an article instead of a section, depending on the situation. But yeah, it could definitely save you time on when you're writing your HTML. I always forget to put containers in. It is the idea of the containers. If I'm using grid, I probably won't use a container because I don't need it, and I can just position things within. I can set it up. It's not too bad with grid lines instead. So this, I do think that's a nice solution. I'm just worried that sometimes it won't work. Or if I look at my layout, actually, it falls apart a little bit. Well, not that much, a little bit. Or not that it falls apart, but like here, like I'm not using all the space. So what I would do for something like that is I would probably have, depending on like the layout, obviously here it's sections. So let's just say, let's go back to where my section was. So I did have and this could maybe even be on all my paragraphs. It depends on the layout that's been made. Or actually it won't work here because these are they the same? They might be the same width. But I might do like a section paragraph that has a max width on it. So if I wanted, or actually this would work with what you said as well, because the max width would override the width that I'm set. Did I set a width? Or no, I would have 2 max widths. So there could be a bit of a conflict on that. Just because here I think the easiest thing to do would be to say section paragraph has a max width of say 40 ch, and ch is the character, so it's roughly 40 characters. It won't be perfect. So the nice thing with the ch is if your font size increases, it's still going to be the same length. And from a typographic standpoint, that's really useful because line length, like when you're looking at how long your line of text should be, it's really based on how many lines are in a character, how many characters are in a line. So the ch unit for typography reasons is really, really cool. Because again, if the font, like here, if I did font size 125%, you know, this is the last one, not a real word, but if I bring this back to 75%, it's still breaking at the same word because it's going roughly 40 characters long, regardless of what the font size is. So that's kind of useful because then on this one, we could have another one, dot text right, text align right, and then we could use that. That's this one, text right, and all the text goes onto the right side. Oh, the max width is screwing me up there anyway. That sort of that didn't go according to plan. There's a way to fix that, but yeah, that wasn't expected. What's happening is because I have let's put a border on my paragraph, or I'll do an outline again since I said you should use outlines for debugging. So you can see that this is the max width, so it is text aligned right, but it's right on the right side. So it ends up being smushed like that, where you'd want it to move over. So that was a bit of a fail on my part. What you could do to fix that, actually, if you did something like this, which I'm not saying is the best approach, but you could have a text right paragraph is a margin left of auto. I don't know why it keeps going to the top of my page. There we go. So it's putting all of the margin on the left side, so it pushes the text all the way to the right. And something like that could be useful because you might come and do a text center, which would be a text align center. And then you'd have to do this anyway, margin left, margin right of auto. And then we could come on this one and say text center. And I obviously mucked something up. Whoops, text center. There we go. And then that ends up in the middle. And the nice thing with something like this is, you know, it's working, but if ever you had something that didn't have like a max width on it, you had some other selector that changed it, if it's 100% width, it wouldn't move anything anyway. I'm not saying this is the best approach for this either, because if you needed this to be 2 columns, I'm breaking it and it's not really going to work. But just a really quick way that you can embrace the cascade a little bit and doing things like this. This wasn't planned, but like there's nothing wrong with having selectors that look like that, in my opinion. And this is something BEM you really wouldn't want to, you wouldn't do something like this with BEM, for example. Patrick, can we talk about create plan from open of a project to start writing code? How you work with layout, how you start thinking about what you do in the first place without HTML. The third module is we're going to do a 3-page layout because module 2 we're going to be doing a lot of refactoring along the way. So we're starting with something simple, making it bigger. It turns into a full page layout with a whole bunch of different sections and different things going on with it. That we have to keep going back into and sort of refactoring along the way. And I do think that's a really useful skill to have because one of the reasons that we write messy CSS is because a project gets a little bit bigger and we start sort of mucking around with it instead of fixing what the problem is in the first place. So week 2 is more about fixing things. Week 3, we're doing a 3-page big project together starting from 0. So yeah, I think, and just because by the time we get to week 3, we have all the tools, you know, week 1 is really just about sort of the littler things. Week 2 is about sort of some of the bigger behavior and helping to get consistency. There'll be a lot in module 2. There's a lot of talk about consistency and how we can easily get consistency with our layouts. And then we add in the stuff from week 1 to reinforce it, but also to use it. And then in the third module, we're doing the big project, because there's the two worlds, right? There's one where we're continuing to work on a project, and then there's the other world where you start from scratch. So we're definitely going to look at both of them. Russell, thanks for coming. Yeah, Mitchell, utility classes definitely can clutter up the HTML. I don't like things that are just pure utility classes and nothing else. Because then it's almost like you're writing inline. Like, why not just do style equals and write your CSS there almost? You know what I mean? Utility classes are better for consistency, obviously, but when you go all in on like the atomic CSS where it's just utility classes for everything, I find that you're taking away something about the CSS. I do think utility classes, we should use them, but I think that you should use them for a few big things, a few things that you're reusing consistently, and then after that, you go down to the next level and you start doing things that are more specific to your components and all of that. Because obviously components are part of, the smaller pieces are a big part of what you need to do. Yeah, so Adam Lawrence, I've never used grid. At work, we tend to focus on flexbox in column and a header and a footer and the middle section that grows scrollable. How do you, I am going to talk about that in week 3. My voice is not doing great right now. Excuse me. There we go. That sounds better. So we will talk about grid versus flexbox. I'm going to look a little bit at some of the flexbox behaviors that exist so we can control it a lot better, because I do think a lot of layouts still are, I think flexbox is still good for a lot of layouts. And we'll sort of dive in on when, there's actually a really specific part that will look at the difference and why I choose one of the parts why I'm choosing grid instead of flexbox. And the layout could easily be done with both of them. It just is a different way to tackle the HTML when you do it. But yeah, we'll definitely look at it. Gregory, yeah, global styles, quick wins, get into your utility classes that you're going to use a lot, exactly. And then from there, you start getting more specific and you start diving in. And this layout doesn't really have too much specific differences. And I sort of did that on purpose. Just because I wanted to sort of look at that. Or I was going to look at the buttons, but I think I'm going to answer some other questions instead. Because the way I do the buttons was sort of covered in week 1 and 2. We sort of go back over it again there. Peter saying that utilities can sort of be replaced as mixins. The one, and 100% they can be, because mixins are awesome for when you have to reuse code over and over again. And even, you could make I think extends were originally put together to try and replicate the idea of a utility class, but extends can be dangerous as well. So I'm a big fan of just using mixins for everything. Patrick, during the first week, I found a lot of helpful stuff, even though I know about the topic. That's good. Dave, is it possible to have too much coffee? I don't think we can have too much coffee. I have a little bit, if I see a bit of a discussion on Sass going on. So I do, if you are curious at all about Sass, I do have some stuff on my YouTube channel. And the bigger projects, I've changed how I approach writing Sass, but I have a few bigger projects where I've used it on YouTube. Okay, so I'm going to jump back into my slides because I think I skipped Oh yeah, this is what we were just talking about. We can start in the global scope and then we go from there and then we work our way down to getting more and more specific with what we're doing. And one thing I think it's really important to say is it's okay if we get more specific. I really want to hammer this home because I do think BEM, one of the reasons I've moved away a little bit from BEM, and I still use the double underscore a lot. I even used it in this example. And if you're not familiar with BEM, I do break it down a little bit in the first module, so I won't talk too much about it now. But one of the reasons I don't like it is just it sort of fights it sort of fights CSS a little more than what I like. And I do think that it's okay when we start writing selectors that are like this. Or selection, section paragraphs, and you're selecting things, or even like what was mentioned before with, I forget who mentioned it, but that idea of having a section and doing something like that and getting smart with how CSS works and taking advantage of saying like, oh, I need everything in my section to have a specific behavior. I think that's a good thing to do. And it's something that I embrace in the first one. Again, there's nothing wrong with BEM. And if you prefer working that way, by all means, I used it for years and I was very happy with it. But just the more comfortable I've gotten with CSS, the more I think we should be embracing how CSS is meant to work. And if we go back up here, where I say we start in a global scope, whoops, that's not the one I wanted. You guys can see it. Here, we can create scope when we need to have scope. What I meant by that slide is exactly what I'm talking about right now, where let's just say this bottom one down here, or even that's my, let's pretend that's a component, and my component, let's give it a name of, so here, let's just say this section, or even my paragraph. Let's give this paragraph a class of example. It's not a good one. I'm going to do that. Never mind. That's not going to work on a paragraph. Let's do it up here on my section, example. But like, there's nothing wrong with selecting, like this is my example, I'm selecting it. This is still part of technically the global scope because I could use my example anywhere. So let's just say on my example, I gave this a background of teal. So there it's working. And like, this is part of my global scope. I can reuse this anywhere I want to, right? So I could come in and I could put that on a single paragraph. So I could come on this last paragraph and give this a class is equal to example. And now that's changed. And I could come up to my H1 here for some reason and give that an example. And that changes. And so this example is part of the global scope, and I can use that class anywhere. And then people argue, and I think this is one of the things people don't like, and that's why a lot of the naming conventions like BEM, the naming convention is to show you where you should be using it, but there's nothing stopping you from actually using it there. So this is where you can get more specific though. And I can create scope by making compound selectors. So I could say example paragraph is color red. And now any paragraph that's in my example will change to red. This one's not changing because this is a paragraph that is the class of example. It's not nested inside. So I could do something like that. Or I could say that dot example, anything inside my example that's a direct child of it should have a width of 40 pixels and a color of yellow. The color might not work actually. The red's going to overwrite it because of the specificity here. But you can see there's the color just kicking in. So like these are big exaggerations, but it's to say like, or I could even say my H and H2 that's in here is going to get the color yellow or whatever it is. And I could be more specific. And this is, people say that, we lack scope in CSS, but then this is creating scope and it is raising the specificity. And then people, that's where you get these specificity wars and there's issues with that. But if you're doing this and you're writing it in a very purposeful way, I think it's fine to write CSS this way. The only thing I would suggest is trying not to have like example.container or even like section contain. So you're a paragraph that's in a container that's in a section of example. Like I think we know not to do that when we can do the exact same thing just by having that, right? So do be smart about how you're creating the scope, but we can have scope with CSS if we want to. Bye, Tim. Thanks for coming. One way you could change for, well, if you had a 100-page site, Winston, I'm hoping that you're using some sort of backend to run it all. And you could even have like, I would probably have a example or whatever, I don't know, home h1. Actually, I do this on my own website. The code in here is a complete mess. But if we go and look at my website, if we are on the articles, all of the headings are my main color is this orange color. If you go to YouTube, all the colors switch, all my links, all my buttons switch. And if you go to courses, it all switches to the green. So I just did that with a custom property and a class. So if I go on my, is it not on my body? Oh, sorry, I didn't do it. Normally, you'll see things that are on the body or even on the HTML where that's getting updated. Just I'm using Jekyll as a static site generator, so I just have everything wrapped in a div. It should be a main, to be honest. I should fix that. I'm going to redo my website soon, so that should be a main. But you can see this class of courses is changing my main color. So if I go to YouTube, there's the div that's wrapping everything, and it has the class of YouTube, which is changing the main color on that one. So that's how I did it. There's other ways you could do it. You don't have to do it with a custom property. I could have had it as like .youtube h1 color is, my YouTube color or whatever, red. So you could do that, and then you just have it set up like my H1, my H2, my buttons, all of that end up using the same color. So you could do something like that, but you do need something that's wrapping all the content with a class on it. So I'm using Jekyll, which is a static site generator, but I can have it dynamically add that class to any page I want. So a little far off from what we were talking about, but that's okay. A few questions about my Sass course. So it is going to be my next course. I see 3 people talking about it. Maybe there's more. So yeah, I did make my Sass course. I had to close it because I didn't finish it. And then they updated to Dart Sass, which means I need to redo like half the course. So all the content is really good. I need to update it to bring in some of the changes they made with Dart, like getting rid of imports, adding use, and the other one. And going over the extra functionality of those, and that means redoing like half the content, if not more of the course. But all the content is there, so I don't have to recreate it all. I have it all. I just need to re-record a lot of it, which is fine. But I'm hoping maybe 3-4 months from now, hopefully, I can have that out. Gustavo, if we want to follow CSS and what it can do, should we give classes only, when possible, to the parent most element and target the inner elements, children with CSS specificity coding? That's sort of like this, right? Where I'm doing this. I've grown to be embracing that more, and we're going to see it why I do that. I think a bit more when we get to the 3rd module. And it's not always, again, we want to start big picture and get smaller. So if I'm doing something like this, like here, my example P, I want to do as much of my styling as I can for my paragraph here. So I'm still starting big picture and then getting narrower. But if I get to that component or I get to that thing where I do need there to be a difference, then if it's always consistent with that one component, I do think that something like this, let's say, makes sense. Because it's consistent with that component always. So if that's always consistent with that single component, then like here, let me open up another Figma file. This is what we're working on in module 2. I want to talk a bit about module 2 anyway. So for example, this is like the final build that we're going to do. And so like we have these little square things here, and I also have them down here. But when we first do this, I look at doing it at the component level, like here. I look at how we can add it only to here, because in that part of the design, they only exist in that part. And then how we can break it out into more of a utility class instead of so linked to one thing. So like, or even like, we need a width and a center of the text, or there's other little things that we can limit to like certain situations. But it's always, let's look at the big picture and then narrow down. So like if I'm looking at the big picture, what's something like maybe all the font sizes are the same. But let's just say for fun, these guys had a smaller font size on them. So all 4 of these, the font size was smaller than the rest of the site, and it's only on these 4, then I think it makes sense to have a selector, not that's going to be a global selector everywhere, but where I'm just saying, like, in this section, my paragraphs are smaller. So it's why you need to start at the big picture and work your way down. It's when you start looking at the little things first and then working your way up that you start writing CSS that's conflicting. You start writing and finding sort of problems or issues along the way and all of that. And when you start writing things that you don't need to have. And so, like, as much as possible, big picture to small picture, you write simpler CSS, and you won't find yourself writing too much stuff like this in general. I mean, it's really easy to have things get crazy. You know, it is perfectly fine. But as much as possible, try to have, like, you want, even if you're doing these nested selectors, try and keep them as simple as possible to a very specific purpose. And if you find yourself that you need to do something like container p, I don't know, container, like I had before, you have a section container component p, like, do you need to have all that, or could you bring this down to that? If you can't bring it down to this, like, you need to have this crazy thing, okay, then maybe we just come in and say, like, you know, text red, and you make a utility class to throw in that paragraph instead. So there is that point where, you know, there's a crossover between how complex your selectors are getting, because the more you do raise the specificity, like, as much as I say embrace the cascade and go with it, there is a point where you're creating more problems for yourself than you're solving. And part of it is experience and going through those, but hopefully through the rest of this course, the more we do it, you know, you sort of start finding patterns that you can use yourself. Yeah, I mean, it's gotten, one of the reasons that we see selectors on most elements is because a lot of people don't like this. They think that the raising of specificity that this causes, because you can even see there, we have one element and one class selector. It can be harder to overwrite things. If a lot of the knowledge of CSS that's been built up has been for really big projects or for scalability. And so I do think that, you know, there's people that have been writing lots of CSS for a long time, and they're seeing all these problems that they consistently run into, and they're looking for solutions. And one of them is just give every single thing a class that does that one thing really well, and it works. And I tend to give lots of stuff classes. I'm trying to calm down or see if I don't need to as much, but I tend to give almost everything a class anyway. Maybe it's out of habit because that's how I've always worked. But, you know, again, I think once we're done through the 3rd module and we're thinking of things as components versus like the next level versus the next level, and we've worked our way down, and we're going to see how, like, if we set up a layout properly, we can take a component and sort of plug and play different things, and it's going to work no matter where we're dropping that component. That it, you know, if you can get to that, it's okay on that component to have some nested selectors or compound selectors like this. Jeff asking about the performance of something like this. The performance is really good. CSS, if you go and look back and, like, there's people who do, I mean, the one that people always scream about are these guys saying, like, it causes some issues. CSS performance is more if you're doing animate, like, it's not the CSS loading, it's not the painting of the page, it's when you're causing repaints. So if you're doing animations on transitions on things you shouldn't be doing that cause repaints on the page, that's where you're getting really big hits, because the browser has gotten so good and so optimized at rendering just like a CSS file. Honestly, if the CSS is causing performance issues in any way, I guarantee you that the images and the JavaScript are that's where, if you want to make performance gains, it's in your JavaScript and it's in your image optimization, and then it's going to be finally in your CSS. I'm never too stressed about CSS performance unless it's about things I'm doing that are going to influence like causing repaints through transitions and animations, less so than like the way my CSS is written. Can it be optimized and make it a few kilobytes lighter and make it load a bit faster? Or, you know, can a selector like this slow things down by a few milliseconds because it takes that much longer to parse? It is possible, but I don't, you know, if you optimized one image, you're probably saving more time there than you are in your CSS. Bye, Richard. Thanks for coming. And having, yeah, Jeff does mention having classes on things can make it a lot easier to read your CSS. When you're looking at something, you know exactly what it's being used for. So that definitely has a benefit. And I do think that if you're not sure, like this is really good for something very specific, but only when you need that really specific, like very, very specific thing. As much as possible, this is your last resort. We start big, we work our way down, and then we get to these little specific things where we need to make changes. And you'll find that sometimes you might do something like this, but most of the time you won't have to worry about it. Yeah, everything I've seen about media queries, like I do think, if you're going to optimize your media queries, I'd probably do it with a post processor. Like post CSS, I think can optimize and just take all of your media queries and put them together. I've seen like things on it where people have tested the performance, and I think even if you gzip your CSS, that you can actually have like the same file size and it won't slow down the parsing. It's just your files, like having 20 media queries that are all the same, like it's at the same breakpoint for all of them, and you just spread it out. It's going to make your file heavier, but I don't think it makes it longer to parse for the browser, if I remember correctly. Sergio is asking about using an ID. I don't like IDs still. That's one thing I will stay away from. Just because, like, my idea here would be that all of my, like, I could if I'm making a component, let's just say, let's go take a look at that design we were looking at. If I'm making like this thing here, I have it 4 times on my page. So like, it's very rare I'll actually have an ID on a component, because components should be something that can be reused. It's very rare in CSS these days that we create something that will be used in one instance and one instance only. Brent, exactly, yeah. If you have the same media query 10 different times, your file size will be a little bit bigger. But if you gzip it, I think it's almost the same, or if not identical. Dan, nice, thanks for coming. David as well. Dimitri asking, actually, it's something I want to talk about when it comes to media queries. And I see it, web components helping structure and optimize both HTML and CSS. Yeah, I think that, I mean, I have mixed feelings. I'll leave it there. David, if you're really good at vanilla CSS, you'll pick up Bootstrap or Tailwind really easily. Derek, bye. And Jolene, a bunch of people jumping off. A couple things that I just want to take a quick look at. Here, I want to get into some of the questions that people ask. So, M and Rem, what was the question that was on M and Rem? I should have put the whole question instead of just putting M Rem. I'll see if I remember what I wanted to talk about there. We talked a bit about that. So just don't put if you're going to put a font size on your HTML, make sure it's a percentage. Oh, this was great. So I had a screenshot of the question. So this was an article saying that you should leave font size at 100%. You should put all your font sizes as rems, and you should use pixels, I think, for your margins and paddings, and everything else, including media queries. So this goes into that question that was just asked about media queries. And this is something, let's see, did I close the article? Because I can't copy paste from here. Did I close it? Oh no, I meant to keep it open. That's not it. That's not it. That's not it. That's not it. There is one here for one of the questions. Oh wait, it would be here. I can copy paste it. Refresh. I'll come up to this one after. Actually, I might not have time to do that, but I'll do something for you that addresses that question, maybe as a bonus or something. So I'm not going to read the article with you guys because obviously you don't want to watch me. You don't want to read. You don't want to go through the whole article, but he talks about the issues with everything. And one thing he does bring up is don't put font size as 10 pixels because that breaks things. So that's awesome. But then I almost feel like when he wrote this article, so let's just go back up. The main point, don't use rem m for padding and margins and more, which is padding, margins, media queries. And the reason, his main reasoning is that for some reason, actually, this one here, the false prophets of rem m also preach using m values for media queries, but what does this do? And then I get like, he comes up with this answer here that maybe sounds like a good idea, but he didn't even try. Because if you put rem or pixels in your media query, they'll behave exactly the same if someone zooms in or out. So like I find like, here's an argument on why you shouldn't do it, except it falls apart because that's not how it works if you did that. Because he doesn't seem to understand how pixels work when you zoom in and out, where the browser sort of makes adjustments to what a pixel value is anyway. So just, you know, if ever you read something and you're wondering about it, try things out because what he says here doesn't make sense. Because if the user changes the default font size, also the breakpoints are changing. This is the same if you put your font size, a media query, if you put your media query in pixels and they change their default font size, the breakpoints are changing. So, and then he's saying the problem that happens here is that they get the mobile view, they're seeing a mobile view instead of seeing the desktop view with bigger font size. To me, that's the beauty of the whole thing working, is that if somebody increases their font size enough, the layout is going to break if you don't change it to the mobile view anyway. If you get this giant font size on there with like three lines of text on a page or on like one area, that's not a good user experience. He seems to think that it's a good thing if the layout's exactly the same with just this big font size changing, and I don't understand that at all. And then it also goes into the idea of like, well, the margins, if the user is zooming in, that your margins and padding are changing, and that's a problem. But if the font size is getting like, that's how layouts should work. That's the whole point. When we make something responsive, we want it to adapt to what's going on around it. And so use it like if you had fixed pixels for your padding everywhere, and then you made a button bigger, right? It's always the same example I use, but here I put buttons in and I never put any text in them. Is my button going to show up? So here, if I do my .btn, I'm not going to set the whole thing up, but if I give this a padding of 5 pixels, 10 pixels, background is red, so we can see it there. And then I make the font size for rem. Let's just say that somebody zooms in a lot. Well, my button looks like that. And then if I make my font size 0.75, like, I mean, the spacing looks a little different, but everything, like, I'm locking this in. Whereas if I did this with M's and Rems, so if I do this as like padding 0.25 M, 1.5 M, this reminds me. So here my padding is one size. Let's just do one thing here. Display inline block. It's because I have two buttons next to one another. That's why things look kind of weird. Let's delete the second one. So here now, like if I make this for rem, like all the spacing around my button is adjusting with my button. And if I make my one, like the scale of the button stays the same. It's not like this increasing font size within my button. And that was the question that was about the M versus rem and when to use which one. You will notice in this course I'm using rem more often than I have in previous things I've done. But just if you want something to be consistent and always be the same unit, use a rem. And if you want it something that's going to adjust, use m. So that's why I like using m as padding most of the time, is because if I do change my font size, I want that padding to adjust with it. And this is where rem and m are kind of weird. The font, if you're using m's on the font size, the m is looking at its parent. So what's the parent's font size of this button? So if I said I have a paragraph, font size is 1.25 rem, whatever. Let's just make it 2. So see how this got bigger? And then if I drop this down to 1, it gets smaller. If I make this rem, and I make my paragraph font size bigger, the button hasn't changed size. Because the button is locked in. It's looking at the HTML. It's not looking at the paragraph because it's inside of a paragraph, so it's not looking at its parent to get its size. If you put m on any other property, so if it's on a font size, it's looking at its parent's font size. If it's on any other property, it's not looking at its parent, it's looking at itself. So this padding, or this 0.25, 1.5, is looking at this unit right here. Or if I did margin top to m, it's looking at this number to calculate this here. So it's not looking at the parent anymore, it's looking at itself to get that. So m's are kind of weird in that sense. And that's why I do have a video on m's versus rems and why m's can be really dangerous. Because the most often example you might see is with like a list. So if you have, list isn't always the best. I don't know why it's a list, but you can get you get a compounding factor. So again, let's say my paragraph has a font size of 1.5 m, and then my button has a font size of 1.5 m. The actual font size of this here is bigger than this here because my button is nested inside a paragraph. So this is 1.5 times 1.5. And then if I said, I don't know why I would do this, but container font size 1.5 m. So now like this is 1.5 times 1.5, and then this one is 1.5 times 1.5 times 1.5. So it creates this infinite, like you just keep scaling up and up and up. Whereas if on all of those I used rem is always going back to the HTML elements font size, so you're always consistent. Every now and then you'll run into a situation where you have like a span, or usually it's a span or something like that, where you might actually set the font size in M, and there's a reason why you want to do it. But 99% of the time, font sizes, you want to set them in rem. Bye, Jordy. Thanks for coming. Dave, enjoy your pizza. The next thing I wanted to look at, did I get into this? Oh yeah, so just here, like to me, it doesn't make sense not to use pixel values for anything. And on the media query front, I'll drop this and maybe in somewhere, the Discord or something. And if you haven't joined us in the Discord, please come and join us. But I talked about this article a lot, and it still holds true. Media query M. There's actually, if you want to read a rebuttal, Adam Wathan wrote a rebuttal to Zell's article. But he looks at using pixels, M's, or rems in media queries, and they all work. The issue is Safari, and this is from 2016, and it still holds true. I think, was it Brent? Did you check it out recently? But there's an inconsistency in Safari, whereas M works the same in every single browser, and it works the way you'd expect it to if people zoom in, out, or change their font size. Whereas pixels and rem, Safari treats it differently when you change the base font size than the other browsers. So if you always use M for your media queries, you know it's going to be consistent across all your browsers at least. All right, next one. And I had another, okay, I'm going to jump to another one because this one's a little bit more complex. So I can't get to that. I'm not gonna have time to do that one today, even though I wanted to. I thought we'd have more than enough time, but as usual, everything takes longer than expected. Discord, I wanted to open this up because I saw a question. Can I make this bigger for you guys? I can't zoom in. Sorry, the font might be a bit small, but I'll read the question out loud. Why is content box the initial value for box sizing if border box makes more sense? Because that's how it started with and border box didn't exist. So we can't, is there any good use cases for content box? I honestly can't think of any. I've never changed something back to content box, but content box was the default. And that's another place where CSS is a little bit different from most programming languages. In a lot of programming languages, you can release a new version and just change how something works. You can't do that in CSS. You can add a new feature like flexbox or grid and add new things on top. And you'll actually see when we get to module 2 that that actually leads to some inconsistencies where they do things differently than the original defaults. But you can't change the actual default because that could literally break the layouts of thousands or probably millions of websites who based their websites on the content box sizing and at the time had no other way of changing it, or all the people that still make them not even knowing about the difference. So you can't change the default on a behavior like that. In the importance and origin chapter, you mentioned that important user declarations top important author declarations. Could you elaborate on the ways that the user can make declarations, their own declarations, and set them as important to overwrite declarations the author set? Usually it's with plugins or other things for accessibility. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. That's okay, I don't need this anymore anyway. So yeah, usually it's with, and I got one here, which is called font contrast. So I haven't actually tested this. We're gonna do a little test on the fly here. So with this font contrast this is something someone would use. You can whitelist and blacklist websites. You can bold all the text on a site because sometimes people set the font weights at 300 and you find it's too light. But what's interesting is you can actually choose a threshold. So if any font is below 16 pixels, you can increase that font size by whatever you want. So I don't know what the strength does, to be honest with you. So let's go and set we're gonna test it now. Body, my font size, let's set this down to 6 pixels. Let's make it really small. And look at that, it's not 6 pixels because this plugin is overwriting it. And what happens if I do this though? Font size is 6 pixels, should still be big, important. I just want to make sure that looks bigger than what I thought it would be. I'm just going to delete some other, I might have some of those other things I was messing around with. That's here. Whoops, that's not what I was talking about. Let's see if it's, oh, it is 6 pixels. Okay, so my thing's not working. I said we're doing this on the fly. What if I take off the important? I was playing with it just before refresh. Why is it not working? What if I do this in, let's just say 0.75 rem. Threshold, oh, I need to make, refresh? Oh, is my strength? I don't know how the plugin works, but usually things like this are done with plugins. So just you know, if a user is trying to overwrite things, there's a lot of plugins that are used for accessibility. I tested this on an actual, let's try on my actual site and see if it works here. Maybe it's having, so threshold will be kind of big. And we'll just pump this up a little bit, refresh. What if I do bold text? Ah, so there the bold came in anyway, and I think it actually did change the font size, so you can see, let's try that here then, with the bold text at least. Strength is 0. Let's just try bold text and see if, it doesn't seem to want to work on, oh, no, I don't know why. Maybe it's because it's on my local host. But I have a feeling that this one would also work and it would also overwrite people if they'd set things as, so like this is setting the default. See how everything's going there? And I could be wrong about this particular plugin, but these plugins are writing their own CSS. Actually, we could probably get it by inspecting. So they've put important on it. Actually, it's a little bit different. It's not an author declaration. It's coming in as an inline style on everything. So it's a little bit different, but it's, even though they're not doing it through the browser settings and their own important settings, it's just to say, like, in this case, they set it up as an inline style with important to make sure that it can overwrite yours. So however they're doing it, whether it's an important user declaration or it's a plugin that's inserting the CSS this way, just know that the important takeaway from that is that the user can overwrite what you're doing. And by overwriting what you're doing, it can break your layout. Like here, the line height got screwed up because the font size got bigger. I'm a little bit surprised that how bad the line height looks at this font size. But this is where, like, that idea of if somebody did this and my padding and my other sizes weren't increasing to go with that, my layouts would be terrible. You know, and even up here, you can see it's not looking great because of this change. Oh, it also took the colors away, which is kind of funny because I did the bold text maybe. So like here, like, you know, like even my layout here has adjusted. Some of this looks really bad. So, but you know, I am adjusting, my layout here has probably changed a little bit more than, because if I go smaller, I'm just curious. It's getting a little busted, but like, see how here, how narrow it's getting? Like, I don't want this breakpoint to get too far adjusted, or even my navigation's broken, it's overlaying. So you can see how, like, the user can fight things that you're doing. So it's just for you to know, the really important takeaway for that part is to know that you don't have final say on what your site's actually going to look like. Yeah, I think that plugin doesn't work on local. This plugin is called, I've never used it before, Font Contrast. It was I looked it up, like, I only saw that question like 2 minutes before I went live. So I just looked for the first one I could find, because I don't actually have ones. There's all the other ones, you'll have like high contrast modes. I think Firefox actually has a high contrast one built in. I could be wrong on that, doesn't it? I'm not sure. I think there's a high contrast mode built into Firefox, and then but you can get extensions for that too, so it changes your colors, and there's all sorts of different accessibility plugins that you can get. And I do think I saw another question. Oh no, okay, so it's not for this. That's all good then. So yeah, I think that's everything I really wanted to get through on. Yeah, I'm not gonna have time to build this, but maybe I'll make a little bonus video one day and upload it. Because I do use position sticky a little bit at one point, or if not, maybe in the next live or something, we could take a look at doing something with the layout that he suggested, because I do think it's a common design pattern that talks about a lot of different things that would be useful to know, but that don't really fit into the course material. So I might take a look at that another day. Does anyone have any other questions? I'm gonna, while I wait for questions to come in the chat to keep up. A few people dropped off, but we still have a lot of people here. Thank you guys for coming to hang out. It's been almost 2 hours now, so I appreciate you sticking around the whole time. Mark Seaborn, you know what? I'm gonna write that down. M versus Rem cheat sheet. I'm gonna make a handout for you guys on that, or like a PDF. I'll make something, a PDF or something you guys can reference that sort of goes through that breakdown that I just did. I think that could be really useful. I'll make it a download. Oh, Bastiman's asking about the code challenges. You know what, let's go take a look. You can definitely start now. I was going to originally have 2 challenges for next week, but we're only going to have 1 because it's a really big challenge. But I'll talk, what is it? Dashboard. Courses. Oh, wrong. I have to go to Chrome for this. Which window do I want? We'll go to this one. Oh, I did have the article open this whole time. I knew I was sure I had saved it. Courses.kevinpowell.com, the .co/dashboard. So just one thing, I'm very sorry for the confusion that came up over the dashboard. If you're on the silver plan, you won't see all of these things. But in the gold plan, there are a couple of extra things in here. So it got put in alphabetical order. So the one that we're on now for the first 3 weeks is this one. So if anybody hasn't started yet, this is where we're starting. Because this one here and another one somewhere else, this one here are locked right now. But this is unlocked, and that's where all the first 3 weeks of the course will be here. And then there's the other parts that come later. And in the downloads and challenges, you will find, I can get rid of coming soon. They're here. I have put this one already. So there is the a PDF for the anatomy of a CSS rule, and I have other ones planned for the future too. I've put the slides, so you can download the slides all from week 1 and from the bonus content. And there's challenge 1 and challenge 2 right here. And so I have to rename that challenge 2, but you can download the challenges. And the challenge 1 and challenge 2 are based around the content of the first module. So if you go and take a look at what it is, I've given a starting point for the code. Actually, the first one's a little weird. I won't lie. Because if you go into the start here, there's 2 different HTML files, a naked one and a starter one, and then there's a naked CSS and a challenge CSS. So the starter is linked to the challenge and the naked is linked to the naked one here. But always in the challenges, I'm going to be giving a README file that explains everything. I have a Markdown viewer because they're written in Markdown, but you can just open it in VS Code or something else. There's no problem. So I sort of explain here. I give a bonus challenge that I go and I try and explain as much as I can. If ever you're stuck or you don't understand exactly what you want to do, you can just ask me in the Discord or send me an email and I can sort of walk you through it a little bit in more detail. But I always try and explain it as best as I can. But in all of them, I do provide the design files. So you're getting the Figma file or a JPEG and the design specs. So you can base it on that. So the first challenge is to build something like this. Because it is based on the first module, there's one where we haven't looked at layout yet. So if you're not confident enough to work on the layout, or you don't want to spend the time working on the layout, you just want to focus on the things we covered in the first week, you can try and use like the starter one. Whereas if you want to challenge yourself more, you can start with the naked one because that one starts with absolutely nothing. And we can try and build that one out. The second challenge is a little bit more familiar, maybe, especially if you watched some of my things. But oh no, I didn't include. Oh, I'll have to open it in Figma. I'll add the JPEG to it. I thought I had a JPEG in there. If I do that, it doesn't open it, does it? Oh, you have to go to this screen. If ever you want to import in Figma, make sure you come to this screen. Come on. Anyway, you can get the design here. This one's a little bit more familiar, maybe. The next, I'm going to have another challenge, number 3, coming out soon. That's going to be a big challenge. I'm not sure exactly, but it's a bigger page. I can't open it for some reason. I don't know what's going on, but whatever. You can come and check the challenge files out on your own. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put out 1 challenge per week for the first 6 weeks-ish. And if you don't get through them, you don't get through them. You can come back to them later. But we're gonna end up with like 12 to 15 challenges total. So at one point, I'm gonna be doing 1 a week, and then we'll slow down to maybe 1 a month. But we'll get up to like 12 or 15 total challenges by the end of just different layouts for you to build to practice everything that you've been learning along the way. And for the dashboard, I see. Mike was just asking, so it's just here. When you get into the dashboard, just make sure you start, like, I know it's not in the right order here, so just make sure you find this one, CSS Demystified, start writing CSS with confidence. And if you go into there, you'll find the lessons. There we are. Hi. And then, it just goes on, and then there's the lock stuff lower down. 3 days. The next one's unlocking soon. Hey, Caleb. Welcome. So if you're looking for something to do this weekend, you could try the 2 challenges out. Brent, I see you saying, please include the media query with M if you can. Is that for the cheat sheet you mean, or something else? Patrick, I use M mostly for, I mostly use M when it comes to, what's it called? Fonts or padding and margins. I've even started using Rem a lot for margins, but it depends on the situation. it is one of those it depends, which makes things harder. There's a lot of things in CSS. I think one of the hard things with it is there's a lot of it depends. But usually what you can do is build up a rule of thumb. So if you want just a really generic rule of thumb, it's rems always for font size and ems for most other things. And you'll probably be safe. Okay, I'll add that, including media queries. SBW94, the full recording. I'm going to send an email out Saturday with the link to the recording. It's going to be the same link that you have now anyway. Or actually, no, it won't. It's going to be on the course portal. I'm going to add it. I don't know where I'm going to add it, but it'll probably be in, I just closed it. Probably be in this section, the downloads and challenge. No, yeah, it'll be in the downloads and challenges. I'll make a new section for the live sessions. I think downloads, challenges, and lives maybe, or something like. I think I'll include them in here, but I'll make sure to link everything to you as it comes out. John, all the units in Figma are in pixels. Yeah. Wendy's gonna dream about CSS tonight. Hopefully it's dreams and not nightmares. Massimiliano. Hopefully I didn't butcher your name too bad. When am I going to complete today's design? You know what? I'm probably going to throw it in the challenges, but I will. It might be a little bit because there's not. I mean, there's only a few little things to do in it. I was using it more as an example. I wasn't really planning on finishing it, but I could do something where I finish it up and put a recording of it up. All right. So I think we're ready to wrap things up. It's exactly been 2 hours. That's pretty incredible. If you have any more questions, don't be shy. Let me know. I'll hang out for a few more minutes if you want. If you haven't joined us in the Discord, please do come and join us over there. It's a lot of fun. It's a really good way to be able to chat with other people. Even if you're not familiar with Discord, there is a little bit of a learning curve to it for sure. It took me a while to get used to it. I prefer it over Slack. I know that's a controversial take, but I do like it more than Slack. There's other communities too that you can jump into. Most YouTubers these days, the developer YouTubers, seem to have them, so you can be in a few different communities. But it's just so cool to be able to chat with other people about different things. You know, I'm here to teach you this course, but it's also good to get other people's perspective on things and not just mine. I know, you know, I think I know a fair amount about CSS, but it doesn't mean that my opinion's the best one, or you might have questions about JavaScript or back-end stuff or whatever it is. So, you know, we can open up the doors to having lots of really good discussions. So please do join us in the Discord. Yeah, I'll try and do a bit more live coding next time. For sure, Patrick. Alexander, yeah, you can use this link for the next day or so, and then this link for the replay. And then I'm going to take the link down once I put the replay up on the course portal instead. Jeff, can you put the beer in the fridge? I could use. It's a little early. I'm looking forward to mine. If you do like watching live coding though, join me on Twitch. I try and do twice a week. This week I only did one, but I'm on Twitch a couple times a week. Yeah, there's tons of great Discord communities out there. So definitely get on Discord and join the different ones out there. There's so much knowledge that everybody has and is super willing to share through them. All the coding communities are super cool and super helpful. And everybody likes sharing and just talking about, you know, what we like talking about. And we learn more about each other too. Alexander, Michael, Bastiman, Jeff, Patrick, Brent, thank you guys all for being here. David, what type of IPA are you drinking there, David? I think I have to go to the store. I have to go make some pizza dough actually first, and then I have to run to the store, but I think I'll be getting myself a few more beers. I have one very good IPA waiting for me in the fridge though. Vasil Bats, thank you for coming. Thanks for hanging out. I'm glad you like my lessons. Jeff, it's 5 p.m. Definitely beer time for you then. I have a few more hours to go, I think, for me. Peter, I'm glad that you found it useful. If ever you guys want to see something specific during one of these live streams, again, just message me anything. Like, I'm going to be using them to recap content as much as I can. But if there's specific things you want me to see, that's what the questions are for and stuff like that. And I might, throw some bonus extra live sessions in once the main ones are finished, just because I like doing lives. Louis Gamor, love you. You're too much. Thank you very much. Sergio Tigan, thank you guys so much for hanging out with me, though. This was a lot of fun. I'm glad you guys all managed to stick around for this whole time. I'm guessing people are dropping off. Patrick, thanks for hanging out. Everybody else, thank you for being here. I'm going to go and I need to get some more water. My coffee's done. My water's empty. And my throat wasn't ready for this 2 hours of talking, so... Oh, the time zone conversion did not work, Rick. Okay, thank you for letting me know. I thought YouTube would do that. The next live session will probably be on a Friday again, just because I want people to have time to look at some of the content, even if they can't get through all of it. But what I'll probably do is the next live session is going to be a bit earlier than this one was. And then the next one after that's going to be a lot later than this one was, just because I do want to try and hit different time zones. All right, everybody. Thank you all for coming and hanging out, and I'll see you in the Discord. I hope you enjoy the course. I hope you enjoy Module 2. It's going to be open, I think it's Monday at the same time that the last one unlocked, I'm guessing. So the next one will be unlocked on Monday. I know some people asked about unlocking it earlier so they could do work on the weekend. Sadly, I can't, even if I change the time now, it would only affect if new people got added to the course. It doesn't change it for people who are already enrolled. So I can't, there's no way for me to actually unlock the course content earlier. So I do know it would be nice to have over the weekend, but you'll just have the weekend after to do it instead. But again, don't focus on trying to get all the content done in a week. If you have the time to do that, that's awesome. But if you need to spread it out for longer, take 3 weeks, 4 weeks on one module, that's perfectly fine. Especially if you're doing a lot of practice and a lot of the code along the way at the same time. Like, take your time and digest and bring what you're learning from that into some of the other things that you're doing, whether it's a side project or whatever. Take your own time with it. And don't rush. Please don't rush to try and